the biggest guns in history. Dora was a unique artillery piece. The super heavy 800mm railway gun was the pinnacle of German army artillery development during World War II. Designed by engineers from the famous Krupp company, this gun was the most powerful artillery weapon in Hitler's arsenal. As was often the case with German weapons during the war, Dora captivated the imagination, but the gun's actual effectiveness, and more importantly, the resources invested in its creation, were in no way justified. The gun's fate partly mirrored that of the super heavy Maus tank. It was a weapon made not for war, but for propaganda. And after the war, for encyclopedias, reference books, fiction, and popular science literature. This development is best described by the proverbial phrase from ancient literature: "A mountain gave birth to a mouse." Hitler and his generals placed great hopes on this gun, but the results obtained from using Dora were negligibly small. How the idea for Dora emerged. Dora was originally developed as an ultra-powerful artillery piece mounted on a railway platform. The main targets for the 800mm gun were intended to be the French Maginot Line fortifications, as well as border forts in Belgium, including the famous Fort Ébène. The task of developing a gun to crush the Maginot Line fortifications was personally set by Adolf Hitler during a visit to the Krupp factory. This happened in 1936. It's worth noting that Krupp had immense experience in creating super-powerful artillery dating back to World War I, so the choice of developer for the new ultra-powerful gun was obvious. Installing Dora in firing position in Crimea. The 800mm artillery gun, firing projectiles weighing around 7 tons, comparable to the weight of light tanks of that era, was supposed to have vertical elevation angles up to plus 65 degrees and a maximum firing range of 35 to 45 kilometers. The technical specifications stated that the new gun's shell must be able to reliably penetrate 1 meter of armor plating, 7 meters of concrete fortifications, and up to 30 meters of solid ground. The work on creating this unique railway gun was led by Professor Erich Myler, who had extensive experience in designing various artillery systems. In 1937, Krupp completed the design for the super-powerful gun. That same year, the military placed an order with the company to manufacture the ultra-powerful artillery piece. It's worth noting that despite Germany's developed industry, it did face some problems. This included the effects of several financial crises that hit Germany before the war, as well as the impact of restrictions in place after World War I during the Weimar Republic era. German industry systematically failed to deliver even small-caliber anti-aircraft artillery on time, let alone a super-heavy gun that had no analogs in the world. Dora was fully assembled only in 1941. By that point, the Maginot Line, which its 7-ton shells were supposed to demolish, had long since fallen. And Fort Ébène, which had given German generals headaches before the war, was captured within a day by just 85 paratroopers who landed inside the fort. In total, Germany fully assembled 2 of these guns, Dora and Gustav. The second gun is believed to have been named after Gustav Krupp, the company's director. This order cost Germany 10 million Reichsmarks. For that sum, the army could have built 250 15-centimeters SFH-18 howitzers or 20 long-range 240mm K3 guns, which would have been far more useful for the Wehrmacht. The largest artillery crew in history. The ultra-powerful Dora railway gun was a construction of gigantic proportions. In all literature, the gun's caliber is usually listed as 800mm, but to be precise, it had an 807mm caliber. The barrel alone weighed 400 tons and was 48 meters long. The total weight of the entire gun on its specially designed railway carriage was 1,350 tons. An 800mm projectile for Dora with a T-34-85 tank in the background. The total length of the artillery system was 3 meters, with a width of 1 meters and a height of 6 meters. To better visualize the size, it was just slightly shorter than a standard 5-story Khrushchev-era apartment building. Meanwhile, the gun barrel alone weighed more than 8 Soviet KV-1 heavy tanks from 1941. The shells that Dora was supposed to fire were also enormous. The high-explosive shell weighed 4.8 tons, while the armor-piercing shell weighed 7.1 tons, comparable to the combat weight of one of the most widespread pre-war tanks in the world, the famous Vickers MKE 6-ton. The maximum range for high-explosive shells was 52 kilometers and 38 kilometers for armor-piercing. The artillery system itself could only be transported in a disassembled state. A dedicated rail sorting yard had to be constructed at the deployment site. The first train delivered 43 carriages carrying support personnel and camouflage equipment when the gun was deployed to Sevastopol in 1942. The second train of 16 carriages brought an assembly crane and auxiliary equipment. The third train of 17 carriages delivered parts of the gun carriage and workshops. The fourth 20-carriage train carried the 400-ton barrel and loading mechanisms. The fifth 10-carriage train transported shells and propellant charges, with the air temperature kept below 15 degrees Celsius. Just setting up the firing position took 3 to 6 weeks, with another 3 days required to fully assemble and mount the railway artillery system. Assembly involved railway cranes with 1,000 horsepower engines. Up to 20 civilian Krupp engineers were also permanently attached to operate the gun. The loading process for the super-powerful Dora gun. Although mounted on railways, Dora could not move along regular rail tracks. It could only be moved and fired from a specially constructed double-track railway line. When assembled, it formed a gigantic 40-axle, 80-wheel rail transporter, with 40 wheels on each side of the double track. Over 4,000 people were involved in preparing the position and servicing Dora at Sevastopol, an unprecedented number. This included the 250-person gun crew, but also thousands of workers who prepared the position through excavation and engineering works. Around 400 personnel were in an attached anti-aircraft battalion. According to Manstein, 2 battalions with 88mm anti-aircraft guns and 20mm autocannons provided air defense cover for Dora at Sevastopol. The gun was also assigned up to 500 personnel from a chemical warfare unit that could provide smoke screens to conceal it. Dora's effectiveness was questionable. Hitler's most powerful artillery system played practically no role in World War II. While the shots had an impressive effect, the practical impact was minimal. Dishes on tables would rattle up to 3 kilometers away after each shot, but scoring direct hits at maximum range was almost impossible. It's estimated that during the siege of Sevastopol between June 5 to 17, 1942, Dora fired 48 standard rounds at various fortifications around the besieged city. Only 5 of the armor-piercing shells hit their targets, 10%, while the fall of 7 shells could not be observed at all by German spotters, 14.5%. For the remaining 36 observed shells that missed, the deviation ranged from hundreds of meters, with overshoots of 140-700m and undershoots of 10-740m. Dora firing at Sevastopol. Another 5 experimental high-explosive rounds were fired on June 26, with unknown results. The only successful hit by Dora is believed to have been the destruction of a major ammunition depot hidden in cliffs on the northern shore of Severnaya Bay. The 30m deep depot was destroyed by a single shot, as recounted in Manstein's memoirs after the war. However, Germany's high command evaluated the effectiveness of Dora's shelling at Sevastopol as extremely low. Hitler had ordered it to be used against forts and coastal gun batteries around the city, but the only noticeable achievement was hitting the ammunition depot. The chief of the German General Staff, General Halder, later summed up the results of using Dora, describing the railway gun as a true work of art, but ultimately useless. Fortunately for the USSR, the Germans spent 10 million marks on something that could only be used for propaganda rather than war. If German factories had instead produced an extra 250 heavy 15 cm howitzers, It would have been much harder for Soviet forces on the fronts of the Great Patriotic War. There is some fragmentary information that Dora may have been used a second time to suppress the Warsaw Uprising, but details are scarce and it's more likely it was not used in Warsaw, or its use had zero effectiveness. Of the two guns built, only Dora saw combat action, while the thick Gustav never fired a single shot. A third planned railway gun with a new longer 520mm barrel, known as the Long Gustav, was never completed before the war ended.